demonstrators. And anti-government demonstrations also underway in Iran. Police have reportedly used tear gas there in an attempt to break up the gatherings in the capital. Well, we'll talk to our correspondents live in Bahrain and Yemen in just a moment. But first, Stephanie Decker takes a look at the scale of the unrest in Libya.
The streets of Benghazi on Saturday, a fierce battle and the scene of death and violence.
I have cousins who are in the streets whose friends have been killed right in front of them. The killings are just going on. Bodies are piled everywhere. The numbers that they announce on TV are nowhere to compare. They're just firing people. Sniper shooters are on the rooftop. Every house, every single house.
In the morgue, one man takes a last look at his relative and murmurs, he was not armed. Also from Benghazi, this video claims to show what protesters believe is a mercenary, a hired killer, contracted by the Libyan regime to attack demonstrators. And the unrest is spreading across the country. Here in Al-Baidiyah, thousands gather near the main mosque, another city rocked by days of protests against the country's leadership. Chanting "There's no God but Allah," mourners carry the body of one of those killed. And there's more chaos. Anti-Gaddafi graffiti sprayed on walls and a voice through a loudspeaker saying, "There's no state here." Reports of casualties are running high and constantly rising. The city's hospital overwhelmed. The morgue is filled with bodies, and more are still coming. On Libyan state television, the first signs that the country is in difficulty. Images of burning buildings, a result of the protests. They're blaming foreign forces for trying to destabilize the country. But while thousands of Libyans remain on the streets in various cities across the country, it's becoming harder and harder to ignore their calls. Stephanie Decker, AlJazeera.
All right, well, that was a situation in Libya. We're off to Bahrain now. Our correspondent James Bays is in the capital, Manama, very close to Pearl roundabout. In fact, we can see the Pearl right behind you, James. When you were talking to an opposition leader a short while ago, he seemed to say, yes, you know, talks could happen. And you said to him, that's not really what the people in the square behind me seem to be saying at the moment. They want to go that much further. Are the two sides quite far apart?
There seems to be a disconnect between the opposition politicians and the people. And let me tell you, David, when that opposition politician finished his interview and headed back down into the crowd, we followed him. And the crowd came up to him and said, "You're talking about dialogue, you keep talking about dialogue." He tried to explain himself, and the crowd around him said, "We don't want dialogue. We can't talk to these people after what has happened. We want the government removed and we want the king out of here." That's the sort of feelings that we're getting here, the strength of opinion you're getting among the ordinary people. Now, the opposition politicians are saying that what they want first is some sort of commitment from the government, from the ruling family, that they're serious about making concessions, that they're serious about talking about constitutional reform. They say they haven't had that yet, and that's why, although there's this offer of dialogue, no one's actually sat down to talk about anything yet.
It's a question of trying to bring those two sides together, isn't it? Those that are out on the streets still protesting and those that are prepared to go in to talks. Let's talk about the ruling family itself. It now appears that everything to do with sort of making any kind of concessions with the protesters is coming from the Crown Prince, and the Prime Minister, who is the King's uncle, is completely out of the picture.
That's right, but I think he is the man who is likely to lose his position if even the moderates in this, the opposition politicians, get what they want, because they're asking for an elected parliament. They already have an elected assembly lower house, but it doesn't have total power because there's an upper house that's appointed. But they're also asking that that parliament then appoints the prime minister. That would mean an elected prime minister. Now, the king's uncle is the prime minister at the moment, and that's a post that he gets by appointment from the king, who is his nephew. The previous king was his brother, and he's been in that post, David, for 40 years now.
And what happened to the general strike, James, that was supposed to have happened on Sunday?
Well, the formal general strike was called off because I think those that called it, felt that the demands had been met. They said, we're calling a general strike unless the police and army withdraw and people are allowed to protest. And that has been allowed, and so the strike was called off. But there are a lot of people who aren't going to work here. We've seen them all day, people crowding here. People say they're not going to be leaving this place. It's become very permanent here, David. We saw this morning the tents going up. We saw all the food stalls coming here. There's a crane here with a giant Bahraini flag. There are portable toilets. This is a camp, they say, will stay for the foreseeable future until they get what they want.
James Bays in Manama, thank you. Uganda's electoral commission's announced that President Yoweri Museveni has won a new 5-year term with 68% of the vote. His main rival, Kizza Besigye, took just 26%. AlJazeera's Mohammed Ado's in the capital, Kampala. First of all, the opposition saying they're not very happy with this. Are they going to do anything about it?
Well, David, the opposition are not happy about the results. This is not, they say, what they expected, and they are calling the elections a sham. However, after being in a closed-door meeting for most of the morning, Kizza Besigye emerged around midday and said that he is going to take the issue to the people of Uganda and see what they do with it. He says that he has been to the courts twice before, in 2001 and 2006, when he lost to President Yoweri Museveni also. And he says he's not going back to the Supreme Court, the highest court in Uganda, but this time he's going to let the people of Uganda decide what course of action they are going to take. The allegations they're making are many, and they vary. They're saying that, for example, there have been cases of stuffing of ballot boxes for President Museveni. They're also claiming that there have been intimidation of their agents and police intimidation of their agents in different polling stations around the country. So many claims they're making, but for now they have not specified actually what they're going to do.
But if supporters of the opposition take to the streets, they face a pretty clear-cut case of sort of time to bundle them away from the president himself. He said this a couple of days ago. I remember talking to you about it. We'll just lock them up, said Museveni, bundle them into jail. And then he said, almost as an afterthought, then bring them to the courts. I mean, he's made it pretty clear what he plans to do if there's any opposition on the streets.
Indeed, President Museveni has made up his mind. He says he's not going to allow any protests in either the capital, Kampala, or anywhere in Uganda. And he says anybody who tries to do that is going against the constitution of Uganda, and they will be taken to jail. And already there is a big presence of security personnel in almost all parts of the capital. I don't know whether you're seeing here where the vote tallying just got finished and the votes got announced. The security ring around it is just so huge. And also in some of the main parts of town, especially security installations and some parts of the capital, and any open ground is being guarded by the government forces to ensure, the police, I must say, to ensure that